Hi, and welcome to TEDxWUSTL's 2021 event. My name is Jessica Galen.
And I'm Isabel Sanjamino.
And we are the co-presidents of TEDxWUSTL. We are so happy to have you all join us in listening to these 5 outstanding speakers. We may be biased, but we think their talks will leave you wanting more. While this may not be the event we originally planned to host in April 2020, we are nevertheless incredibly proud to share these next speakers with you today, who have been waiting to take the stage for a year and a half.
This year's theme is blank reimagined. A few months ago, we sat down with our team and reflected on how we have grown since we originally envisioned the purpose of our event back in February of 2020. You will have the pleasure to get to know our wonderful team over the next 2 hours as they guide you through today's event. So much has changed since we first found these speakers, yet one thing never failed to unify them. They seek to push boundaries and reimagine the world around us.
We are now going to pass it over to Charlie Cromwell-Pinder and Gabby Martinez to introduce our first speaker, Aaliyah Allen Coleman, who will speak about reimagining music and its history.
Thanks, Isabel and Jess. My name is Charlie Cromwell-Pinder, and I'm a producer on the logistics team. I'm particularly excited for Aaliyah's talk today because I know music has been a super important aspect in my life, especially during the last year. You can just put in your headphones and escape the world around you, which has been extremely nice to do with the pandemic surrounding me wherever I go. Hearing Aaliyah's perspective has certainly made me think about the music I'm listening to in a new and different way. And I now am more conscious of the music I'm listening to when I want to escape, instead of just mindlessly listening to anything.
I totally agree, Charlie. This past year, music has carried me through. And while I've been listening, I've been thinking about the conversations that I've been having with Aaliyah. My name is Gabby Martinez, and I'm a speaker coach on TED. I've worked closely to develop Aaliyah's talk since she was first chosen to speak over a year ago, and I'm so proud to be introducing her today. Working with Aaliyah has been an absolute joy. I've learned so much from this talk and from her, and I cannot wait for all of you to finally hear what she has been thinking and writing about for quite some time. Please welcome Aaliyah Allen, a sophomore at WashU, as she explores the sonological and social context of genres like R&B and rock and hip hop and pop, to consider how genre names like pop rap erase modern popular music roots in Black culture. She highlights the artistry of Black music and reminds us that when we are consuming music, we are also consuming history.
At the end of fall 2019, I sat with my friends in BD, procrastinating by comparing our Spotify Wrapped data, a feature which Spotify releases that summarizes your past 365 days of music. At first, there were really no surprises for me. My top artist was Beyonce, my top album was Summer Walker's Over It, and my top new artist was DaBaby. My top 10 albums and songs were overwhelmingly R&B or an R&B rap blend with artists like J. Cole, Miguel, and Bruno Mars, all of which was expected since I would consider R&B my all-time favorite genre. So imagine my surprise when my top genre for the year was not R&B, but something called pop rap. My first thought was, what even is that? So I decided to Google it. Wikipedia defines pop rap as a genre fusing hip-hop's rhythm-based lyricism and pop music's preference for melodious vocals and catchy tunes. Then I decided to Google who are pop rap artists. The results were artists like Drake, Migos, the City Girls, Beyonce, Alicia Keys, the Black Eyed Peas, The Weeknd, and Tupac, all vastly different artists. I began to realize this pop rap genre didn't have much of a sonological definition. I turned to my friends and jokingly said, so I like R&B and rap, but Spotify just didn't want to say that for some reason. Later, on social media, I noticed that others were expressing confusion over why their top albums and songs were overwhelmingly by R&B or rap artists like Ari Lennox or Lil Baby or SZA or Gunna, but yet their top genre was something called pop rap. I began to wonder, what was Spotify trying to say with this pop rap? Why wouldn't they just say rap or R&B? This bothered me because R&B represents a core part of my identity. When I listen to R&B, I hear myself and my experiences and the history of Black people reflected back at me. So when Spotify told me that my top genre was not R&B, but something called pop rap, that stung a little bit. That sting prompted me to look into how we conceptualize the American popular music narrative. I would like to propose a narrative that more explicitly centers race and racial dynamics in order for us to all more thoughtfully consume media and art. You see, music does not exist in a vacuum outside of society's larger values, structures, or technology. For the purposes of this talk, I'll be focusing on R&B and rock and roll to illustrate what I call the split, or the point in the American music narrative where it hinges on rock and roll in a one-dimensional way and whitewashes American popular music, so that the conversation is split into two, one Black and one white. I'm excited to share this version of the American popular music narrative, which centers Blackness as indispensable to it with you all. Let's start by comparing and contrasting the sonological elements of R&B and rock and roll. First, R&B stands for rhythm and blues. It might best be described as a collection of sounds from the Black Southern musical tradition, like gospel, jazz, and blues. Many early R&B artists got their start and trained their musical ear in the church singing gospel music. The rhythm part of its name is associated with the groove its beat structure produced, and it had an emphasis on the 2 and the 4, or what's known as the backbeat, sort of like a 1, 2, 3, 4 type of emphasis. Its polyrhythmic texture is associated with jazz. The blues part of its name could be associated with its bluesy style sound and its blues style band setup, with piano, guitar, bass, and drums, and sometimes other instruments like strings or horns. R&B's roots in such rich genres make it a highly flexible hybrid genre, capable of an entire wheelhouse of sounds, which is evidenced by its many subgenres and offshoots. Now let's talk about rock and roll. Rock and roll also has roots in the Black Southern musical tradition. Many early rock artists also grew up around the Black gospel sound. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with, rock and roll heavily emphasizes the electric guitar, which is something that jazz and blues popularized. It also emphasizes the backbeat, and it also is cited as using blues band setup with piano, guitar, bass, and drums. It's also quite flexible, and it also has many subgenres and offshoots. At this point, I imagine many of you are wondering, well, what makes them so different? They sound pretty similar. They both have roots in gospel, blues, and jazz. They both emphasize the backbeat. They both have a blues-style band setup, and they're both capable of a pretty heterogeneous sound and have many subgenres and offshoots. What makes them distinct? Well, not much sonically, especially in their early beginnings. In fact, many early Black R&B artists are cited describing that they made the same music their whole career. Just one day, DJs and promoters started calling it rock and roll. And many of rock and roll's earliest innovations were pioneered by Black artists. Let's use Elvis's legacy to explore this. Elvis's status in rock and roll history as the king is centered around his guitar playing, his performance style, and his popular songs. But a lot of his accolades could actually be attributed to other Black artists. His guitar playing could also be attributed to Sister Rosetta Tharpe or Chuck Berry. His performance style, easily attributed to the flamboyant performance style of Little Richard. Even some of his most popular songs were originally recorded by Black artists from smaller labels. Let's take one of his most well-known, Hound Dog. That was originally recorded by a blues artist named Big Mama Thornton. Have you ever heard of her or her original version? Although it did very well on the R&B charts, it never reached the success Elvis's did. This was actually quite common for white artists from bigger labels to re-record songs from Black artists from smaller labels, and yet when they did it, it became rock and roll. To explore this further, let's look at Ruth Brown's story. Have you ever heard of her? Ruth Brown was a talented R&B singer in the early years of rock and roll in the 50s and 60s. In fact, she was so talented that her music kept Atlantic Records alive when it was just a fledgling independent label. So much so that they sometimes called it the house that Ruth built. And yet, when Patti Page covered Ruth Brown's song, What a Dream, it shot to number 10 on the pop charts. And while Ruth Brown's went to number 1 on the R&B charts, and never experienced a pop crossover success. Patti Page enjoyed the splendor of a decades-long career, and Ruth Brown was pushed out of the music industry when Atlantic cut ties with her in the 60s. This was extremely common for Black artists, as white artists were more likely to be signed to bigger labels with more resources who could promote their music, and Black artists were more likely to be signed to smaller labels and were less likely to get booked due to segregation. Although many of rock and roll's biggest acts, including the likes of the Beatles, started their music career recording Black songs, who gets to be remembered as the heroes in rock and roll history? Certainly not these Black artists. So why is it Black artists will get erased or minimized in rock and roll history? Well, to answer that, we actually have to look at another part of genre formation that isn't always highlighted: their social context and construction. You see, genres are not empirical sound categories. They are how we interpret and impart meaning onto these sounds. R&B and rock and roll were no different, yet how do we come to see them so differently? Well, let's talk about the social context they were created in. At its onset, R&B was more of a commercial category. You see, starting in the 20s, the music industry started releasing these phonograph records called race records, which were collections of music from Black artists for Black audiences from Black genres like gospel, blues, and jazz. Then, in the 1940s, the Billboard charts adopted a chart called the Race Records chart, which charted Black popular music. In the 50s, due to changing attitudes towards phrases like race music, they changed the name of the chart to the R&B chart. Since any sound can become popular, at its onset, R&B could sound like anything, but it could not look like anything. It was Black, first and foremost, heavily racializing it. While the rhythm part of its name was associated with the groove it produced in audiences, the blues part of its name kept it firmly rooted in the Black community, since just previously, blues had been race records. Now let's talk about rock and roll. Rock and roll, again, came along in a similar fashion. It was originally a commercial category, because starting in the 50s, radio DJs noticed that white teens were calling in more and more often to hear R&B songs. They decided they needed a new term to describe the same music for their white audiences. Well, what term did they settle on? Rock and roll, to describe the rocking and rolling movement white audiences love so much, with no blues moniker to racialize it as Black. This racialization of genres is not unique. It had happened all before with genres like blues and country and jazz. What makes the racialization of R&B and rock and roll so unique is its intersection with the expansion of mass media, with the popularization of things like radio, television, and movies. You see, rock music and rock artists were peddled through mass media. This reshaped the entire popular music industry, and these changes reflect popular culture as we understand it today, specifically popular music. So then, popular music's association with rock and rock's association with whiteness results in pop music being associated with whiteness, so that pop music becomes white music. And even when pop is no longer rock, pop remains white. This pattern of making Black sounds more palatable to white audiences by using the popular music moniker to put a white face onto a Black sound continued until there was a sound with no white face. Hip-hop is the Black popular sound with no white face. Following the civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s, and the mainstream success of labels like Motown and artists like Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross, Whitney Houston, and Michael Jackson, Black artists gained more mobility and agency and began charting on mainstream charts like the Billboard Hot 100 as we formally desegregated society. Then, as hip-hop emerges as the next frontier of Black music in the late 80s and 90s, it becomes more and more normal for Black artists to chart on the mainstream charts. This is why, in 1991, when the first hip-hop song goes #1, hip-hop becomes the new pop sound. Hip-hop, like R&B, is flexible and diverse and able to be sprinkled across genres. That is why it still reigns today as one of America's top pop sounds and as one of America's top cultural exports. A pop princess or a heartthrob featuring a rapper is a pop hit formula. Pop artists like Ariana Grande can sprinkle in trap drums or rap verses in some of their greatest hits. And Drake, a rapper, has more Billboard hits than the Beatles. And yet I bet many of you would hesitate to call Drake a pop star. And I bet even fewer of you would call rap pop music, even though it proliferates through most of our popular culture today. So what is it about calling Drake a pop star or rap music pop music that feels so blasphemous? It's because hip hop is the black sound with no white face. Although post rock and roll, it became more and more normal for black artists to chart on the pop charts, the precedent rock and roll set naturalized something which is not natural, the whiteness of pop. The blackness associated with hip hop is so potent that it antagonizes the underlying whiteness of pop music. So although the pop rap moniker is contextually and functionally no different than previous genre distinctions, it feels unnatural. This is because hip hop is the popular black sound with no white face. And this is due to the R&B and rock and roll split of the 50s and 60s and the unemphasized racial aspects of our American popular music narrative. So here we are today. Rap and R&B can be pop music. At this point, you might be a little confused. Well, why was I so bothered then? Don't I like pop rap? No, I don't. I like rap and R&B music, genres whose sonological elements and social constructions point to how race has impacted and continues to impact American popular music. Music genres are not cut and dry sound categories. Genre might more accurately be thought of as a spectrum of sounds that blend and borrow from each other due to natural human innovation, cross-cultural sharing, or changes in technology. However, it is the social meaning that we ascribe to these sounds or the genres these sounds belong to that creates chasms between rock and roll and R&B, pop and hip hop, white and black music. These types of choices situate black artists and black music as raw materials available to be harvested by white audiences and white artists and turned into something of value once they're deemed pop music. When combined with barriers from systemic racism, black music and black artists are left at a disadvantage, and they are devalued in our history and social awareness. It's not that I don't want black music to be popular. Of course I do. Black artistry deserves to be loved, and in my unbiased opinion, it's completely enjoyable. But what I don't want, and what black artistry doesn't deserve, is to have to sacrifice its history to be loved. And that can only happen when its audience is not only cognizant of that history, but protective of it, which is what inspired me to share this talk with you all today, to share knowledge that will help you become a part of this process. Enjoy your favorite music and share your favorite songs and artists, but also remember to share where they came from. Even consider sharing this talk if you're feeling fancy.
Aaliyah, thank you so much for pouring your heart into this speech. I know we all learn from your research and will approach music from a more historically informed perspective moving forward. My name is Kayla Bohr, and I'm a producer on the logistics team. It has been a privilege to work with such a talented group of people to plan this event over the past year. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Jamil. I'll let our speaker coach Brady give a proper introduction, but I really enjoyed hearing from Jamil about building a society that is less punitive, more compassionate, and more rehabilitative.
Hey everyone, I'm Brady Schaefer and I'm a speaker coach. Hopefully everyone has enjoyed the talks thus far. And I hope our audience will be able to take away a lot from this talk, just like Kayla has. I've had the opportunity to work with Jamil one-on-one and learn about his journey firsthand, which has been truly amazing. Jamil Span is an alum from the WashU Prison Education Project and is currently a participant coordinator at the National Community Bail Fund. Today, he's going to be advocating for higher education in prison and identifying resources to help people reintegrate into society with long-term success. So please listen with open ears and an open mind, and I hope you take away a lot from his talk as he, shares the stage for the first time to, share his experiences with the world. Thank you so much and enjoy.
The honor of taking this stage represents a culmination of events that I will always reflect on as a capstone to the first half of my life. Because when I graduated last May, the previous 3 years that it took to reach that point were all part of a rebuilding process in which I worked a series of hard manual labor jobs while starting a family. So, unlike most of the graduates in the class of 2020, who I imagine were disappointed by the news that in-person graduations would need to be canceled due to the pandemic, when I got my degree in the mail, held it in my hands, and posted a picture of it to social media, all I felt was a tremendous shower of relief. See, I was born into a family of educators and knew by the time I started school that I was expected to earn a college degree. My grandfather was the principal of the elementary school that I attended. My favorite aunt had a long career as principal, and my sister is currently carrying on this family tradition. So, after graduating high school, I followed in the footsteps of several family members and was accepted at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, where I completed 2 years of enrollment. But ultimately, my goal of obtaining a college degree was derailed, and before I became a college graduate, I survived a total of 12 years, 9 months, and 6 days of time in prison, which is exactly 85% of a 15-year sentence that I got for my participation in the robbery in 2003. Fortunately, no one was physically hurt during the commission of the crimes that I was convicted and sentenced for, but the psychological trauma that I caused to the victims in my case and to myself cannot be quantified. But in the last 18 months of my sentence, I got lucky when the state shackled me in chains, my wrists to my ankles and around my waist, and shipped me to the Missouri Eastern Correctional Center. Initially, I only considered the transfer to MECC a stroke of luck because it's close to St. Louis, because to that point, I had mostly been caged in places that were a minimum of 2 hours away from home. This made it harder for me to get visits from the few people who were willing to make the drive. At any rate, after I got there, I found out that WashU had recently established a prison education project. PEP is a higher education in prison program that offers credit-bearing courses and a degree program to both the staff and the people who are locked up. Obtaining access to such a high-quality higher education opportunity prior to and immediately after my release not only saved my life, but also made it possible for me to rebuild it. In the first decade of my sentence, I accumulated over a dozen certificates for taking classes offered by the state. But I knew that PEP would be completely different because those classes aren't likely to be leveraged for anything after release. And even the Missouri Parole Board knows that in some instances, they could be bought on the yard for cigarettes or stamps. I know this because they suggested I might have gotten some of mine like that during my first parole hearing. In any case, because I grew up in St. Louis, right off the bat, I was profoundly aware of the value of an education from WashU. But I had no idea how few programs like PEP exist throughout the country. In fact, it is a major understatement to say that I was lucky to have access to such an opportunity. Although a lot of people know that the American criminal legal system cages far more people than anywhere else in the world or at any other point in human history, most people don't know that severely limited access to higher education for people in prison reinforces mass incarceration. According to the Department of Justice, at least 95% of people in state prisons will be released at some point, and more than 80% get out with time left to serve on parole. But most people go back to prison within the first 3 years after release. I completed 18 months of parole and recently celebrated 4 years of release without being rearrested for anything. I'm a tax-paying citizen whose lived experiences empower me to offer informed perspectives on the issue of why so many people go back to prison. And to be clear, perspectives informed by lived experience are the most credible source of research data on this topic. That said, it is important for me to explain that the language I use and encourage others to use in referring to people who have been to prison is an effort intended to humanize us. So the reason why I say formerly caged instead of formerly incarcerated is because I want to visually and graphically contextualize for those who are fortunate not to have this experience, the act of putting people in cages as the default response to society's social problems. So I never use words like inmate, offender, prisoner, or convict, because I know that those labels have harmful consequences that punish people long after their time has been served. There are 2.3 million people in America who are held in more than 7,000 prisons, jails, or so-called correctional facilities. In stark contrast, there are only 300 higher education and prison programs. A higher education and prison program is defined as one that provides post-secondary education, is formally affiliated with a college or university, and stipulates a high school diploma or a GED as a requirement for admission. Now, of the 300 programs in existence, there are approximately 25,081 students enrolled, although student enrollment has likely declined considerably since the publication of these findings in 2020, as the number of people who are dying in prison from COVID increases daily. What this data tells us, though, is that only about 1% of the 2.3 million people who are caged in America have access to higher education. These statistics are even more severe in Missouri, where 859 out of every 100,000 people are locked up. This rate of incarceration is well above the national average of 698 out of every 100,000 people. In Missouri, where there are more than 52,000 people in custody or on supervised release, there are only 55 students enrolled in 2 programs, which means that the percentage of access here is roughly 0.1%. Given this percentage, I bet that it doesn't come as a surprise that without my participation in PEP, I wouldn't be here today. Because instead of access to high quality higher education or platforms like this, people returning to society typically become entangled in a web of legal and institutional barriers that we are ill prepared to navigate. In Missouri alone, there are 684 collateral consequences laws that restrict people with criminal convictions from participating fully in society and cast us, often permanently, to just exist in the margins. The right to vote, access to education, employment, and housing are just a few of the challenges that people face after release from prison. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, formerly caged people are 5 times more likely to be without work than the general public, 10 times more likely to experience homelessness, and 5 times more likely to be without a high school diploma. These factors help to explain increasingly high rates of recidivism, which is people going back to prison after being released. And contrary to popular belief, caging people doesn't deter crime or improve public safety. In fact, the punishment system in our country is clearly ineffective at improving public safety, and we must try something different. I believe strongly that restorative alternatives to the current model of caging as many people as possible are critical to building a more just and equitable society. A recent study by the Rand Corporation found that obtaining a higher education reduced recidivism by 43% and is 4 to 5 times less costly than reincarcerating people. As such, an expansion of higher education and prison programs, specifically ones that prioritize reentry pathways that lead students to the traditional campuses that sponsor them, will alleviate taxpayers of some of the cost burdens of just shipping people back to prison. Additionally, it will provide folks who are in prison with the necessary tools and networks of support to make positive contributions to society when they get out. Because the hard reality is that time served is insufficient compensation for the debts we are told we must pay back to society. Years of unproductive time in isolation and a diet that includes food that is literally labeled not fit for human consumption are all largely unimportant after release, which is when the process of rehabilitation really begins. It is not possible for people who have been to prison to make amends to anyone in society impacted by their offense until they are released. And the idea that prison actually rehabilitates anyone is frankly ridiculous. From my vantage point, caging people is intended to break the human spirit, chiefly by ignoring the root causes of what leads people to prison to begin with, and by cutting off all community and familiar connections. None of this positions people who have caused harm to make amends or those who have been harmed to be healed. With this in mind, although the acceptance of formerly caged people into campus communities has the capacity to elevate and to transform lives, it must be reinforced with community buy-in, collective efforts to establish new social standards that are centered in principles of restorative justice and harm reduction can bring about real and lasting social change. But as the events of the past year in the global fight for racial and social justice has made crystal clear, efforts to effect real change will be met with violent resistance. Even so, we must remain steadfast in all movements to do away with systems that foster harm rather than healing and that compound the challenges that people face after being released from prison. Now, to this point, I have only talked about some of the barriers that returning citizens face after release and have yet to disclose any of the personal challenges that I confronted in my own reentry. The reason that I took this approach is that my goal has been to convince you that greater access to higher education for all is vastly more important than one formerly caged person or the 1% of the entire prison population currently being granted access. So now that you know my message is much broader than how I've been personally impacted, I want to explain what I mean when I say that access to high quality higher education saved my life. 9 months before I was released from prison on March 23rd, 2017, my younger brother was arrested and charged with accessory to murder. We have an older brother who was already doing a life sentence. So when my younger brother got sentenced to life without imprisonment plus 100 years, our family was even more devastated than when I got locked up. My mother has suffered 2 debilitating strokes since I've been home and now has to live in a nursing facility. Additionally, I have struggled to repair more fractured relationships than I can count. Suffice it to say that my social and emotional development took a major hit over the course of nearly 13 years in a concrete box. But since my release, I've become a father to 2 children who have given my life greater purpose. In retrospect, I endured each of the personal challenges that I confronted simply because I recognized the value of the opportunity that I had. See, I knew that my acceptance into this campus community was an opportunity that a lot of people might have thought that I shouldn't have. And I needed to prove to myself and to any naysayers that I was worthy of it. Plus, I knew that if I dropped the ball, others might not get the same opportunity that I did. And this was a huge motivator in the journey to graduation because for me, it was legitimately a second chance, as I was enrolled in college when I got locked up. But most people in prison have never received a first chance to access higher education. However, I understand that no matter how convincingly I present my argument, there will still be some people who cannot be convinced that mass incarceration is a humanitarian crisis in the same way that I do. And there's no way that I could produce a valid argument to deny that I am biased on the issue. But I genuinely appreciate conversations with naysayers the most because they give me opportunities to correct distorted and mostly fear-based perspectives. See, I found that even if people are woke to the social, economic, and political impacts of mass incarceration, many still just aren't open to equitable access to higher education for people in prison as a solution to it. But because my undergraduate education has armed me with dozens of resources to reference in waking people up, the conversations that I have with naysayers are fluid and easy. See, I direct them to resources like the 2018 Equity Indicators Report, which was published by the St. Louis City Mayor's Office, and says that of the 10,000 vacant properties in the city, more than 90% are on the north side where I grew up. I explain how the crumbling housing stock is the result of the city's long and prominent local history of racial discrimination in housing policy and practice. Oh, I'm quick to name drop a study by the WashU Medical School, which highlights several North St. Louis zip codes that have some of the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. I explained how communities where poverty and disadvantage are so deliberately concentrated like this inevitably lead people to prison. Lately, I've been especially delighted to tell folks that the restriction of Pell Grants for people in prison has been lifted, which means that, like it or not, more people like me will soon be granted access to higher education. To folks who seem to bristle at this news, I try to explain that more often than not, The reasons why kids who are growing up in the neighborhoods like the ones that I did are more likely to end up in prison or dead than we are to access higher education have very little to do with our academic abilities. Look, there is no doubt in my mind that being a part of this campus community shielded me from many of the barriers that returning citizens are held up by. And because I am keenly aware of the social benefits afforded to me by my membership, for the past several years, on any given day, I can be spotted rocking a WashU t-shirt. I can legit wear a different WashU t-shirt for a week straight. But I have to admit that only a fraction of this is about school pride. See, for me, a WashU t-shirt is like body armor, but don't get it twisted. I'm under no illusions that my t-shirts have the power to shield me from the social impacts of being Black and formerly caged. I know that they don't because I grew up right here in St. Louis, where the local police department killed more people than any other department in the country between 2013 and 2020. And a recent study reported that being Black in Missouri means that I am at least 15 times more likely to be gunned down by a cop than a white person. Still, I'm convinced that when people see my Black skin in those t-shirts, they convince themselves that I'm not as much of a threat as their implicit biases tell them that I am. Since September of last year, my educational privilege and the connections that it has afforded allowed me to work to end the injustice of money bail in Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm employed as a coordinator for the Nashville Community Bail Fund, a nonprofit organization that works to free people who are detained pre-trial without convictions simply because they do not have money to pay for bail. Additionally, I am privileged to work closely with an organization called Choosing Justice Initiative that works to standardize high-quality legal representation for poor people and strives to end wealth-based disparities in the criminal legal system. I am also studying to take the law school admissions test and plan to apply for enrollment into law school in the fall of 2022. Considering the mountain of challenges that formerly caged people encounter upon release from prison, determination and commitment alone would not have been sufficient to reach this point. I am a formerly caged person. I am a WashU graduate. I am an agent for transformative change. I am Jamil Spann. Thank you for listening.
That was incredible, and I think it's something that all of us as members of the St. Louis community can get behind. My name is Rohan Gupta, and I'm on the finance team.
My name is Michael Triber, and I'm on the finance team with Rohan. We are thrilled to introduce our first performance from one of the most exciting dance groups on campus, WashU Ross.
Thank you so much to the WashU Ross for performing at our event. That was such an incredible performance. My name is Katie McGilvery, and I am a producer on the logistics team. After a long year and a half, I'm so excited to see our event come together and to introduce our next speaker, Professor Tim Bono.
Hi, I'm Sam Cohen, and I'm a speaker coach. I've worked with Professor Tim Bono for the past year to develop his talk about the college mental health crisis and psychology of college students. Professor Bono earned his undergraduate and graduate degree in psychology at WashU and is now a professor teaching one of the most popular classes at WashU, positive psychology. It's been an amazing experience to work with him and explore this topic, and I'm so excited for his talk to finally be live.
A few years ago, I attended a conference that brought together faculty members and administrators from universities all over the country. And as a psychologist who works in higher education, I was eager to attend because one of the goals of this conference was to see if we could gain insight into a question that is on the mind of every college administrator from coast to coast, which is, how can we solve the college student mental health crisis? Now, just a year before this conference took place, the Chronicle of Higher Education surveyed more than 100 college presidents, asking them to report their most pressing concerns outside of the classroom. And according to the Chronicle, 66% of these leaders identified student mental health as the top issue, which far outweighed any of the other concerns that made the list. And this finding is not altogether surprising when you consider that in recent years, the proportion of students suffering from depression and anxiety has been skyrocketing. Well, on the second day of this conference, which was being held on a beautiful college campus on the East Coast during a week with lovely fall weather that was sunny and warm, I decided to play a little hooky and go for a walk outside. And as I was making my way around campus, I happened upon the admissions office, where I was told an admissions presentation was scheduled to begin just minutes later. So, out of curiosity, I joined this group of other campus visitors, and we were led to this admissions presentation, which just so happened to be in the exact same building as the conference I was attending. The admissions presentation was upstairs. The conference, where I was supposed to be, was downstairs. But it turns out that by attending this admissions presentation, I wasn't playing hooky at all, because it was there that I gained even more insight into the college student mental health crisis than I did at the conference itself, and probably not for reasons the admissions office would have expected. This admissions officer spent 45 minutes telling us what made that institution great. She told us all about the experiences the students were having that were great. She shared stories of students doing internships and pursuing research with faculty. She told us all about the student organizations, the campus activities, the dorms, the rec center, the food, making quite a compelling case that being a college student today is great. But then I remembered the real reason I was on campus that day. And it occurred to me that although this admissions officer may have been telling the truth, she wasn't telling the whole truth. Because while she was upstairs painting this idyllic picture of the college experience, just downstairs were hundreds of faculty members and administrators discussing data sets like those from the American College Health Association, showing that over the last year, 66% of students reported feeling overwhelming anxiety, and 46% of students reported feeling so depressed they could not function, which collectively was a glaring reminder that the portrayals of college that are being delivered to prospective students and the actual lived experiences of students in college are often vastly different from one another. And that stark contrast could provide some insight into what has been fueling the college student mental health crisis. one of the ways that psychologists conceptualize happiness is with a simple formula. Happiness equals what we have divided by what we want. In other words, your happiness as a college student is determined not only by all of the wonderful experiences you will have during college, it's also affected by what you want college to be like and what you expect college to be like. Since 2014, I have been the faculty advisor for WashU's Peer Counseling Center. And at the end of every year, I ask the undergraduate co-directors of this organization what they believe to be the primary driver of today's student mental health crisis. And reliably, the one phrase that comes up year after year is unrealistic expectations. Many students start college without a realistic sense of what the experience is actually going to be like. And it makes sense why. Many of these students spent the latter half of high school attending admissions presentations and going on campus tours, each one with loftier promises than the last. And those messages are compounded by the cultural myths that have been propagated in the movies and on social media and by society in general, all of which have sensationalized college as the best 4 years of your life. And then those students get to college, and they face inevitable difficulties, and they compare their actual experiences with those lofty expectations they developed, and very often they are left with no other conclusion to draw than that they are doing college incorrectly, or even worse, that they do not belong there at all. Now, I certainly don't mean to pick on my friends in admissions or to suggest that they are doing anything wrong or that they need to be doing anything differently. In fact, I think it's important that they offer these presentations to get students excited about college. But I also think it's important for prospective students and their families to understand that there's more to the story than just what you see on the college admissions tour or in the movies or on social media. And those other parts of the story have got to be delivered from someone, somewhere. So, as a psychologist who has spent the last decade working on a college campus, this is my message to new students. First of all, you absolutely should be excited about all of the wonderful experiences and the classes and the professors and the relationships and the adventures that will fill the numerator of that happiness formula during your college years. But the other thing you should do, in the interest of your mental health during college, is to be mindful about some of the other expectations you are bringing with you that could be overinflating the denominator of that formula. Because if what you want is for college to be perfect, and if you visit a campus and you leave believing that you have found the perfect place and a destination where you're going to be happy all the time, I hate to be the one to have to break this to you, but if those are your expectations, you very likely are setting yourself up for disappointment. And at some point, you're going to end up disillusioned. Because if you're doing college correctly, there are going to be hard times. You're going to have roommate conflicts. You're going to take classes that leave you feeling disappointed or that you feel are unfair. You're going to pursue extracurriculars or internship experiences that you have your heart set on that you still don't get to be a part of. And that's the case no matter where you go. You're going to face adversity. But one of the things I've learned from studying the happiness of college students over the years is that the happiest students aren't happy all the time. Rather, the happiest students have realistic expectations about the challenges that are in store for them during college. And they have thought about that ahead of time. And they come equipped with the strategies that will allow them to cope effectively. Or at very least, they know who to turn to for help in those moments. Remember, college is great, but part of what will make college great will be the ways that you develop the wherewithal to overcome setbacks that come your way so that you can stay on track toward your dreams and aspirations, not only during college, but also throughout your life. When I think back to that conference I attended a couple of years ago about how to solve the college student mental health crisis, I'm still not sure there's anyone who has the definitive solution. But I do think that if we can be more open and upfront with students about the kinds of challenges they can expect to face during college, along with the behaviors that will proactively contribute to their well-being, then maybe one day, when we talk about the mental health of college students, it will be less of a crisis and instead have more to do with their resilience, their well-being, and their flourishing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rob Diorio, and I'm a speaker coach at TEDxWUSTL. Now more than ever, mental health for college students is a challenging yet vital issue to tackle. Thankfully, just now, we were lucky enough to have Professor Bono do an amazing job acknowledging and addressing the college mental health crisis. Now, we are going to have a 5-minute intermission. During that time, we ask you that you fill out a quick form that asks how many people are watching with you right now, so we can keep track of attendance numbers. Only one person needs to fill this out if you are watching with a group of people. You will also be asked to include your email and the emails of anyone else that is watching with you, so we can send a post-event survey to hear everyone's thoughts on the event. We promise this is the only email you will be sent, and your email will not be distributed elsewhere. In a second, you will see a QR code displayed on your screen. Please scan this with your phone camera. Click that link that pops up and fill out the Google form. You can also manually type in the URL to access the form. If you already did this before the event started, then disregard these instructions. Thank you, and see you back in 5 minutes.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us so far.
Welcome back to the second half of TEDxWUSTL. We hope you enjoyed the talk so far, and we look forward to hearing your feedback in the post-event survey. My name is Shanu Sankara, and I'm the head of the finance team.
And my name is Lily Jimenez, and I'm the head of the marketing team.
Right now, we're going to host a quick interactive activity, and we hope you all participate in it.
Please follow the instructions posted on the screen to access this Wordle and answer the questions posted there. Wordle will then create a collage of all of our answers that will appear on the screen momentarily. Our one ask is that you only use one word. Wordle works best this way. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us so far. My name is Kira Rosen, and I'm the head of the speaker team here at TEDxWUSTL. Our next speaker is Andrew Bergantz. Andrew is a junior at WashU, majoring in mechanical engineering and minoring in aerospace engineering. He'll be speaking about his experience living on the autism spectrum.
How cool would it be to be an extraterrestrial? Imagine traveling all the way across the galaxy from a distant star system many light years away to a planet that promises a peaceful life and the fulfillment of all of your dreams. Now imagine the beings on that planet might think that you're weird, and they might not even accept you. What a freak, they might say about you. You don't belong here. Being an extraterrestrial might not be as cool as you think. It might be incredibly hard. Trust me, I would know. I grew up on the faraway planet of St. Louis County. Okay, actually, not so far away. Pretty close in reality. When I was younger, I developed differently than the other kids around me. I screamed at my neighbors when they tried to greet me, lined up markers in exact rainbow order and alphabet blocks from A to Z. And instead of responding to questions from my parents with a simple yes or no answer, I recited entire quotes from the Disney movie 101 Dalmatians. Compared to the other kids with seemingly normal lives, I wondered which planet I really came from. My parents took me to a neurologist who grimly diagnosed me with autism spectrum disorder. His prediction for my life was incredibly bleak, that I would never understand social cues, play team sports, or have any lasting relationships with friends. That's how my life should have turned out. However, luckily for me, I had a family who believed in me. They immediately set to work, recruiting countless doctors, therapists, psychiatrists, and other loving adults. It was their constant help and support that gave me the incredible opportunity to grow up among my peers and to live a life closer to normal, whatever that means. But there was only so much my family could do to help. As I grew older, I had to teach myself how to navigate the vast, treacherous planet of maintaining a social life. You see, the way my brain works, every time I walk into a social situation, it's almost like I'm playing my first game of chess. Whenever you play chess, you have to remember what the pieces are, how they move, and how to anticipate what your opponent is going to do. That's my social anxiety. In social situations, my brain is constantly forced to think about every possible combination of what might happen. Sometimes I don't know who's who. Other times I don't know how people will react. In these situations, my mind is like a simple Windows XP computer attempting to run a complicated Windows 10 program. I can do a tough engineering problem in 2 to 5 minutes, but I sometimes need up to 15 to formulate the right words to text to a friend or write in an essay. I have different strengths and weaknesses than people without autism, and that's what I need to figure out for myself. To make my social life easier, after finishing 5th grade in my public elementary school, my parents transferred me to a 6th through 12th grade private school, Whitfield. At Whitfield, I definitely felt like I was on another planet. No one said hi or waved anymore. Instead, people spoke informally, using words like sup and nodding slowly with narrowed eyes at each other. People didn't care that I was smart or capable intellectually. They only preyed upon my social ineptitude. People distanced themselves from me. People laughed at me from across the room. Once, somebody stole my computer stylus. Once, someone sent out Photoshop pictures of my face on cartoon characters. Once, I thought I could get a girlfriend simply by asking her out, and then she would just automatically say yes. Okay, let me just say about that last one, that is not true at all. Not on this planet, anyway. But most importantly, no one understood me. Many of my peers were jerks to me, and others thought I was friendly, but weird. Countless nights, right before I fell asleep, I spent hours wondering how I could possibly fit in. I pondered endlessly over every time I messed up in social situations. I constantly thought about how to change myself in order to please others around me. I had inner thoughts like, what could you have done differently? How could you have been more normal? Why are you so weird? I truly wasn't wrong when I said it was hard living on another planet. Humans have only explored a minuscule fraction of the universe as a whole. The estimate for the current distance across the universe right now is about 93 billion light years. However, we've only sent humans as far as the moon, or about 1/25th of a millionth of a light year. Now, those may seem like just numbers, but to reference that distance, that's triple the circumference of planet Earth compared to a value smaller than the radius of a single hydrogen atom. In other words, we've only explored half of a quintillionth of the distance across the entire universe. Just like the vast unexplored regions of our universe, there was so much more that life had to offer me. I was about to discover new joys and challenges which I had never experienced before. And I was not even aware of the opportunities I would have to adapt, to learn, and to grow. On a blustery February afternoon, right after I had just gotten home from classes in my senior year of high school, I heard a noise. My phone was ringing, and it was the 314-935 number. I picked up the phone, and a voice said, "Hello, Andrew. This is Gene Bobbick of the Washington University School of Engineering and Applied Science. I want to let you know that you've been awarded the Langsdorff Fellowship. This opportunity is a full tuition scholarship to Washington University in St. Louis." As his words gradually sunk in, I realized how big of a chance this was. Wash U? Really? Am I seriously prepared enough? Am I ready? I immediately knew my answer. After attending the scholarship retreat in March of 2018, I committed to Wash U on March 27th. I made my dream a reality. As our packed to the brim Kia Sorrento turned right onto Shepley Drive, RAs and dorm staff screaming and cheering at us the whole way to my new dorm building, a big smile crossed my face. I had finally made it. After way too many icebreaker activities and get-to-know-you games over the several days of new student orientation, I attended my first classes on August 27th and beheld the vast new universe that I had just discovered. I got involved right away in way too many extracurricular activities. I wanted to stay involved in 8 different organizations. Of those 8, I only immediately dropped 2 of them. You could say that I may have overcommitted myself just a little bit. Because I was so busy with my clubs, I treated my friendships like I had in high school. Instead of texting with friends often and checking in with them, I spoke with them almost exclusively at shared club meetings or events. In addition, another side effect of being so busy with my clubs was that I prioritized them higher than my classes. The vast vacuum of space is very cold, about minus 455 degrees Fahrenheit. In the extremely cold environments like this, contrary to popular belief, the human body does not freeze instantaneously, but it actually takes a matter of minutes to become completely frozen. Note that in those few minutes out there, without a spacesuit, you would also have no pressure outside of your body, so your skin would continue to expand like an inflating balloon. Even if those 2 things weren't enough, your brain would shut down after about 15 seconds with full organ failure after 2 minutes. That's all not accounting for the lack of oxygen or the harmful UV radiation. In the fall 2019 semester of my sophomore year at WashU, I finally realized what was happening, but I was too late, and I wasn't wearing a spacesuit. My GPA was at a chilling all-time low, my friendships were failing, and I felt an expanding pressure from everyone I knew to do better, including my family. When people would walk up to me and say, "Hey, Andrew, how's it going?" I would reply that I was fine, but I really wasn't. As someone who tries to stay honest and open, it hurt me to live my life in a lie. Even worse, dark thoughts continually haunted me. What would a world without you look like? I thought to myself. It would probably be better. I mean, you do ruin everything. Maybe that neurologist way back when was right. Maybe you aren't cut out for this. Maybe you don't deserve this. Luckily, I mustered up the courage to talk to my parents about what was really going on. They had known about my clubs, grades, and friendships, but not the true depths of my dark emotions. After suffering through many conversations and several breakdowns with them, I began to reteach myself that I was capable of success in both my classes and my social life. In the spring 2020 semester, I started regularly seeing a therapist, and it wasn't always easy, but I began to find more ways to focus on the good in life instead of just the bad. My drive to do better didn't stop when the COVID-19 pandemic began to affect our nation and the world. After our almost month-long spring break, I somehow continued to attend all of my classes virtually, kept up with every assignment, still did clubs, and texted friends more than ever before. By the time the spring semester was over, when people came up to me and asked me how I was doing, I knew I didn't have to lie anymore. I was doing okay. I was in a better place. And today, while I do have hard moments here and there, I continue to improve in my understanding of others and myself. I wanted to share my story with you because I know that not everyone is aware of the challenges that people on the spectrum face in the world today. Hopefully, my story can shed some light on my world and how I interact with the universe around me. Now, here's some more general information about being on the spectrum and what you can do to help people like me. Officially, an autism diagnosis includes difficulties with the following: nonverbal communication, social interactions and relationships, repetitive speech and movement, abnormal use of routines, obsessive interest in objects or activities, and unusual sensory responses to the environment. Many people with autism struggle with issues like these that may seem trivial to neurotypicals, or people not diagnosed with autism. However, it is important to note that it is called the autism spectrum for a reason. Just because you've met one person with autism doesn't mean that they define everyone else. Because if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So how can you support people on the spectrum if everyone is different? Glad you asked. Here are some strategies that I have found helpful in my experiences. 1. Use simple, direct language free of any sarcasm or idioms. Many people on the spectrum are very literal. For instance, when someone says, well, that's just great, it'd be taken to mean the situation is actually great. 2. Try not to ask us too many questions at once and give us enough time to formulate our thoughts when asking us questions. Remember that Windows XP example I used earlier? We're definitely not computers, but it is important to be patient when interacting with people with autism. That way we have the time we need to come up with a reasonable response. 3. Refrain from exposing some people with autism to extreme sensory activity, like bright lights or loud noises. These can often be detrimental to people with autism, so just be aware. 4. Many people with autism also have routines. They can be helpful at times, but can also be difficult to alter if circumstances around them change. Once we've learned something one way, it is often difficult to undo. 5. Many of us struggle with how to socially include ourselves. Therefore, just like people who aren't on the spectrum or neurotypicals, many people on the spectrum just want to be socially included. Don't be afraid to include them. These are a few of the strategies that I have found helpful in my experiences with people with autism. Hopefully these points and my story can spread awareness so that one day we can live in a world where we accept and celebrate neurodiversity. In my academic career at WashU in the future, as I continue being a student, I know that I will continue to face obstacles. Will I be challenged academically? Maybe a little. Will I struggle socially? You bet. But I will conquer my difficulties and celebrate my successes, knowing that my autism makes me who I am. Besides, I'm finally here. I now live on a planet that I can call home. Thank you.
Wow, that was such a powerful speech. My name is Luke Markinson, and I'm on the marketing team. This next performance is by my personal favorite a cappella group on campus.
I can't wait to watch. My name is Sadie Neville, and I'm on the marketing team with Luke. Please enjoy this performance by our incredible WashU students. Welcome, Greenleafs.
fingers to the sky, one back to the wall, my white flag high. Her lips just like a gun, she's got silver bullets on her tongue. He's deep under a spell, I'm screaming out, but it just won't help. I think I'm cursed, I had him first. Adeline, have mercy, you don't wanna break my heart. Take what's mine, don't hurt me, steal my money, steal my heart. Don't take my man, don't take my man. I said don't take my man, 'cause you know you can't down, down. Still my man to give on me. She's got kryptonite and screaming at me. Face is young, she must taste sweet. She dropped those pennies to her knees. Walking on my happy home. Won't give up until I'm gone. I think I'm cursed. I had him first. Adeline, have mercy. You don't wanna break my heart. Take what's mine, don't hurt me. Steal my money, steal my heart. Don't take my man, don't take my man. I said don't take my man, 'cause you know you can't. Put the gun down. Put the gun down. Put the gun down. Finger on the trigger now. Put it down. Put it down. Put it down. Put it down. Put the gun down. Put the gun down. Step out to the whole damn house. Put it down. Put it down. Put it down. Put it Adeline, have mercy. You don't wanna break my heart. Take what's mine, don't hurt me. Steal my money, steal my heart. Don't take my man, don't take my man. I said don't take my man, 'cause you know you can. Put the gun down. Put the gun down. Yeah, put the gun down. Put the gun down. Just put it down.
Thank you so much to the Greenleafs for that amazing performance. My name is Keishi Fakey, and I'm one of the producers on the logistics team. There's no denying that this has been an incredibly difficult year, which is why we hope that some of these talks will inspire you with incredible examples of resilience and innovation. One of the highlights for the WashU community this past year was seeing one of our own do something unprecedented, as he became one of the first Americans to launch into space in nearly a decade. That's why we are so proud and excited to introduce our next speaker.
From NASA and SpaceX, we are very excited to introduce astronaut Bob Behnken as our next speaker. My name is Isaac Bach, and I'm head of the logistics team. And as an engineering student myself, I've been watching Dr. Behnken all throughout his launch and landing over the past year. Bob Behnken is a NASA astronaut and engineer, and after graduating from WashU in '92, he served in the US Air Force before joining NASA in 2000. He was one of the first 2 astronauts to launch from a commercially built and operated spacecraft, the SpaceX Crew Dragon. And today he will be talking about reimagining spaceflight based on his own experiences traveling to and living in space. Dr. Behnken and his family are also currently preparing for another launch next week, where his wife, Dr. Megan MacArthur, will also be traveling to the International Space Station. And we at TEDx wish their family all the best with this trip.
Howdy, I'm Bob Behnken, a NASA astronaut, and today I'm going to talk to you about spaceflight reimagined. I wanted to talk to you to start with the idea in general that becoming an astronaut requires imagination, not only to pick the destination, because, you know, as kids, we all have dreams of becoming something, whether that's a race car driver or a rock star or even an astronaut like it was for me or something else. But we need to come up with the pathway that allows us to achieve that sets us up to go along that journey, that provides the off-ramps to take us to slightly different destinations and then get us back on track to get to that final location. That all takes imagination, and I'm going to talk about some examples of how that's played out for me over the years, and hopefully I'll convince you that our entire pathway is a journey that just truly depends on our imaginations. The last few years, I've really focused on something called changing space transportation. We went from a place at NASA where we flew the space shuttles. We assembled the International Space Station with them. I flew on those vehicles a couple of times. And we've transitioned now to a time where we don't fly space shuttles anymore. We fly some new vehicles. We had to come up with commercial partners and work with them closely to develop the SpaceX vehicle that I flew on, as well as the CST-100 Boeing spacecraft that hopefully will fly a little bit later this year. As you all know, the Space Shuttle Columbia, we lost that several years ago, just a few short years after I arrived at NASA, and astronaut safety became paramount, even though it was a wonderful workhorse and got us into orbit and built that International Space Station. It was a vehicle that fundamentally had some safety issues, not the least of which was just how much propellant you had to put in one place to launch both the crew and the cargo together, and how big the airframe was that had to come back through the atmosphere. And the engineering challenges of continuing to do that safely at that magnitude were just almost insurmountable if we wanted to achieve the safety that we hope to have kind of going forward. I flew on the SpaceX Dragon last summer. That was aboard a Falcon 9 rocket, a rocket that during its development flew a lot of satellites into orbit, and we were able to leverage that experience. The SpaceX team was to develop a highly reliable system. The CST-100 on the Boeing side is going to fly on an Atlas rocket. Again, a system that's launched satellites into orbit, and the reliability is proven by all those previous launches, and the engineering data from all those launches informs future decisions. And that conscious decision to move away from where we were with space shuttles to something completely different took a fair amount of imagination to come up with a way to service the space station. And I'll talk more a little bit later about how we do what we did with the space shuttle with vehicles that look drastically different. Now, there are a lot of technical reasons why we need to reimagine the direction that we're going and how we get from point A to point B, but it's also important to take the people along with us as we achieve those destinations, and that takes imagination. It takes your attention to think about what they're going through at any given point kind of through the process. And for me, on my third flight, this one with the SpaceX capsule, it's a new vehicle. Certainly the perception, if not in actuality, more danger because it was new and no one had ever done it before. And so that was definitely a challenge. I was doing it with a new family. I had a young son who had not seen me launch on space shuttles. And so it was important for me to prepare him for that, think what he would be going through on the day when, I would be laser focused on achieving our mission of launching the Dragon capsule into space. I wanted him to have a good experience and I wanted to set him up for success. So over the years, we did things that made the process of me launching in space seem familiar to him. We went to Florida. We watched a launch together. I talked about what it would be like for me inside the capsule as I was achieving that or going through that. And that really helped him have an enjoyable experience that day, not maybe fear of the unknown. It seemed normal to him, and he was truly comfortable with it. In our family, it's turned out to be pretty great that we followed this path, because when I took him to Florida, he insisted that I was not going to be able to go on a rocket. He didn't think that was a good idea. But when we brought him home, I had him convinced that I was going to go, and then my wife was going to go, and then it was going to be his turn. He'd be the third person in our family to fly in space. And lo and behold, my wife actually is another NASA astronaut. She's scheduled to fly on a SpaceX capsule here in just a few short weeks. And so that's why my message today actually is a recorded one versus one that's live, because hopefully by the time you're seeing this, I'll be focused on getting her into space and standing on the sidelines while she does that, and I'll be with our son. when I talked before about the mission of the Dragon capsule and retiring our space shuttles, I talked about the safety of the astronauts. The challenge was that since space station was built with space shuttles, it was really prepared to be serviced by space shuttles. There are a lot of components on board the International Space Station that are just big, and they're big because they got there with a space shuttle. And so if you want to continue to maintain them, you got to figure out alternate ways in order to do that. And so there are a lot of comparisons that point out a Dragon capsule docked to the front of the International Space Station. They'll show a space shuttle and talk about, hey, now we can do what we did before with that space shuttle with this new vehicle. Well, it's really true that a fleet of vehicles does what the space shuttle could do before, for a couple of reasons. One, they all have different capabilities. There are vehicles that fly up near space station that are grappled with a robotic arm and then attached. There are other vehicles that are primarily big cargo vehicles. There are others that are carrying crew that kind of split up that mission a little bit. But it's also the case that the engineers on the ground had to reinvent how we were going to take care of the International Space Station as well. And so some of those large components we now take apart a little bit and then replace pieces of, or we do a completely different way. And so it's required a complete imagination change, or a shift, if you will, for how we were truly going to maintain the International Space Station without a vehicle like the Space Shuttle to achieve that. But the team has just done a great job doing it, and it's really what they used to call the mother of necessity is allowed them to achieve what they've achieved. And now that we've needed to do it, they've found a way. In addition to all the things that you need to pick your destination, you have to come up with a smart way to do things. You also have to be ready for the changes when they come, and that requires kind of a continuous replanning, particularly in the astronaut world, but I'm sure in everyone else's careers or even in family lives. Things happen, life happens, and you need to figure out a plan to do something completely different in some cases. For me and for my partner Doug Hurley, when we flew on the Dragon capsule, for years, we had planned to do what it says there on the cover of Aviation Week, which was relaunch U.S. human spaceflight from the Florida coast. It was pretty much that straightforward. We were going to launch again on a new rocket from the same place we had launched before. We would check it out at space station and then bring it home and kind of sign off that capability for the next cruise to then rotate to the International Space Station. Well, Plan B came along in early 2020, and the space station had accumulated quite a bit of work that could be done if they had a few more hands on orbit, and they looked at the experience set that Doug and I brought to the table as astronauts who had flown before on shuttle missions and done a lot of that assembly work. We had robotics or spacewalking experience that they could leverage. And so they stretched our 10-day mission for checking out the spacecraft into a longer duration mission. Between 2 and 4 months was what was put on the schedule for us going forward, with the primary objectives of course, doing all the science that we could on board the International Space Station, but to conduct a series of spacewalks to upgrade some equipment on board the International Space Station. Chris Cassidy, the other crew member that's shown in the picture there, and I went out on 4 spacewalks and got to achieve something that we never thought was possible when we signed up for our flights or agreed to go on the missions that were in front of us. Again, I thought I was going on a 10-day mission. Chris thought he was going up and potentially going to be the only U.S. crew member while we did our short visit, and that turned into both of us getting to the milestone of 10 spacewalks together in the photo that was taken there, it was just something exciting for us and something we didn't think was possible, but we jumped on the plan and made it happen given the opportunity. We also had to reimagine what it was like to come home. I had landed on the space shuttle a couple of times. The Space Shuttle Endeavour launched me from the Florida coast off that same launch pad that the Dragon capsule eventually launched off of, 39 Alpha, both at nighttime, which was a pretty cool thing to be a part of. But then rather than come home with 1.5 Gs on the aircraft and that effect on my body after a short duration mission, I came home in a capsule after a couple of months with 4.5 or 5 Gs on the reentry, and then splashing down in the water, not a firm surface, and bouncing around in the ocean for a short period until the recovery ship could get to us. And so definitely something I had to think through and be prepared for, the additional G-loading, what it was going to be like to bob around in the water for that period of time, which was something completely new, something, for me at least, something that we hadn't done as astronauts in the NASA Astronaut Corps for decades. We got to recheck that test box, and looking forward to the Crew 1 team that's on orbit right now getting a chance to be the second ones to do that in several decades. One of the things that I mentioned before was trying to prepare your family for coming home or for the experiences they're going to go through when you do something like coming home. And that's a picture of my son, who, even after we had done our best to make him comfortable with what it was going to be like when I arrived back in Houston on the fixed-wing airplane that brought me back from the Florida coast after the ship had brought us in, he had a chance to come aboard the airplane and spend some time with me before being taken down, and kind of the media circus, if you will, that followed our arrival was scheduled to happen. So he had gone down and was supposed to be waiting with his mother as I came down the air stairs with our flight dock team there. But my son, just couldn't contain his excitement, even though we had done as much as we could to prepare him for that. And he charged the airplane and wanted to give me another hug for coming home. And probably my proudest moment is that I didn't fall down those air stairs after he charged me and nearly tackled me at the bottom of the air stairs in my, post-flight kind of weakened state. And so anyway, that was just something that we did our best, but we didn't completely prepare for him for that. I haven't specifically mentioned the pandemic that we were going through when we launched into space and when we got back. And I've done that deliberately, primarily because it was something that we recognized, we adapted to, and we overcame it. And in the end, it didn't change the mission that we had in front of us. We were able to accomplish all of our objectives, get the Dragon capsule tested out, accomplish those spacewalks, and come home safely, and manage the COVID risk with the appropriate masks and social distancing and all those things. And I'll just put out there that there are challenges in spaceflight. Throwing a pandemic at us was another one that we were able to overcome to get to where we got to. And that's really, in a microcosm, what I'm talking about of that journey, that you continually have to be willing to replan and overcome whatever challenges that are out there if you have a true destination in mind and are going to get there. This is a sequence of photos that I wanted to share with you that showed kind of the mindset that we had when I arrived in the astronaut office, which was that we were going to operate in low Earth orbit and we were going to build that International Space Station, and that would be where we did our work as NASA astronauts. There wasn't a talk of further destinations or exploration further out. My class of astronauts was kind of a core group that helped accomplish the completion of the International Space Station for the most part, to where you can see a nice photo of that in the middle there. But now we're on to that third phase, the beginning of exploration again to other destinations outside of low Earth orbit. And I'm truly excited to be a part of an astronaut office that has a Dragon capsule, a CST-100, headed to the International Space Station at the same time that we have SLS and Orion and the Artemis program and are talking about a gateway to the moon and a habitat on the surface and being able to go down with a lander to get there. And so it's just wonderful to think of where we were and what we've become, and the limitations, it seems like, are truly only folks' imaginations. Again, I wanted to tell you that the journey that you're on, just like for me as a child to the chief of the astronaut office and 3 space missions to low Earth orbit and the International Space Station, takes imagination. Use yours as much as you can. Thank you.
Hello, it's Isabel again, and I'm here with my co-president, Jessica. Jess and I have the privilege of meeting Dr. Benkin prior to the event, and we are so grateful he had the time to share his thoughts and experiences on the TEDxWUSTL stage alongside our other 4 amazing speakers and incredibly talented student performance groups.
Before we conclude our event, we wanted to thank a few of the people who helped make this happen. First, a big thank you to Aaliyah Allen Coleman, Jamil Spann, Andrew Brigance, Tim Bono, and Bob Benkin for their thought-provoking talks. Thank you as well to WashU performance groups, Ross and Greenleafs.
We also could not have pivoted so seamlessly to the online platform without the help of our wonderful advisor, Leslie Husted, and faculty members Bryce Krug, Laren Kidd, Bill Larson, Kyle Hemsworth, the Edison Theater staff, Jonathan Goldstein, Jeff Allen, and Kelly Mandry. We are also extremely appreciative for the Women's Society's continued support over the past few years. Thank you as well to Dr. Margaret Garb and the Prison Education Project for your support. We'd also like to thank Dana Davis and the NASA team for their time and cooperation.
Isabel and I wouldn't have been able to pull this off without our wonderful team who's been working tirelessly to reimagine how to organize a TEDx event and further push boundaries. Thank you for sticking with us as we have grown into this role and for learning with us along the way. And lastly, thank you to our audience for attending and participating in today's event. We hope you found it worthwhile and look forward to hearing from you in our post-event survey. Thank you again. We hope these talks have challenged you to see the world from a new perspective.